We are so glad you're with us today. My name's Ed Martin. Let me welcome you here. You know, I have a secret, and it probably shouldn't be a secret. And this thing has crept in and out of my life over time, and I think that I've dealt with it, and then it seems like I have to deal with it again. And the only really way I know to deal with it is to share it. The struggle of my life, the struggle for my life has always been with shame. And the problem is that when you struggle with shame, it feels shameful to let other people know that you're struggling. Dr. Brene Brown, who has written about this extensively in our generation, a few years ago did a TED Talk that's now been viewed more than 26 million times on the internet. She says when she writes about shame or talks about shame, she always starts with three facts. She says, all of us deal with shame. None of us want to talk about shame. And the less we talk about shame, the more control shame has over our life. So let's talk about it today. Well, first, let me say to you, shame and guilt aren't the same thing. Guilt is when I feel that there's something wrong that I have done. Something I did was wrong. Shame is when I feel like I am wrong. Guilt can be a positive thing. Guilt can lead me to change. Guilt can help me to see the wrong things I've done and motivate me to move toward a positive change. There's nothing positive about shame. Guilt is brought on by choices I make, by things that I have done, things I got wrong. Shame is often painted on us by other people. It comes from voices that we listen to, even voices that are our own that we hear. Dr. Brene Brown, again, when she asked people in her writing for examples of what shame was, this is what she got. Shame is getting laid off and having to tell my pregnant wife. Shame is hiding the fact that I'm in recovery. Shame is constantly raging at my kids. Shame is filing for bankruptcy. Shame is my boss calling me an idiot in front of a client. Shame is my wife telling me that she wants to have kids, but not with me. Shame is my husband leaving me for our next door neighbor. Shame is me telling my fiance that my dad lives in France while he's really in prison. Shame is being addicted to internet porn. Shame is the young man who grew up with his uncle abusing him, and his whole life he continues to feel like he's the one that's dirty. It's the girl who grew up being told by her mother that she needed to lose weight because boys don't like heavy girls. And so her whole life she's kept all men at a distance because she knows ultimately they will reject and hurt her. After all, her mother told her so. For me, personally, shame goes back a long way. I grew up with a really accomplished dad, a high-achieving dad, and a guy who was funny and fun to be with, and everybody loved him, and a dad that was quite a guy who liked to challenge. Particularly, he liked to challenge me, and frankly, I loved it. But he was a guy that I always felt like as a child, I was always this far away from making him proud. I mean, my dad, the irony of it is that once we became Christians, I became a Christian as an adult, and he eventually became a follower of Christ. He became one before me. He eventually said those words to me of how proud he was of me. But for my life, the voices I hear are the voices I heard from him as a child when he would compare me to a horse that couldn't be broken or an animal that was too stubborn to be trained. And the real irony of it was, he was exceptionally proud of me. I mean, I would hear him talk to other people, and I'd hear him receive compliments about me from other people about what a good worker I was and how accomplished I was and how many things I could do at my age and how smart I was and how other guys wish they could hire me to work for them. He loved hearing those kind of things. But when we were alone, when it was just me and him, all I got was correction. And we argued a lot, so much so that by the time I was an older teenager, we couldn't be with each other. We had to be away from each other. And what happened was, over time, the opinion I heard from him about me became my opinion of me. And even today, when people I don't know will come up to me that I don't know very well, and they'll come up and they'll say nice things about me, I'm openly suspicious of that, and I hold them at arm's length, because in my head, all I hear is that they must be lying, because there's not anything that I've done that's worthy of love or worthy of being praised. Why is that? Now, I don't want you to think I'm about to crack up, that you're listening to a guy that's about to fall apart at any moment, because I don't feel that way most of the time. Most of the way, I don't feel like that. But I feel like that more than I should. Why? I don't know. It's just this generic feeling that I have that something's wrong, that I'm wrong. That's shame. One more thing about shame that is really different than guilt. Guilt tends to lead us to try and hide what we've done. I've done something wrong, and I don't want you to know about what I've done because it was wrong. And if you knew it, you would see that it was wrong. Shame tends to make me hide who I am because I am wrong. And if you saw it, you would accept who I was. In his book, Scary Close, Donald Miller shares I think, a very helpful illustration that was given to him by a counselor. He drew a circle on a piece of paper, and he said, this is you. And when you were born, you were a really happy little guy. But then something happened. Maybe you didn't meet your expectations or someone else's expectations, or maybe the kids that you played with, you did something wrong and they made fun of you, and you were made to feel like you were wrong, and shame entered your life for the first time. And it covered who you really were. And the only way that we know how to deal with shame is when shame enters our life, is that to protect who we really are, we create what he called a false self. It becomes the person that we let other people see. It's not really who we are, but shame has made us hide who we really are, so we project this false self of, I'm really funny, or I'm really attractive, or I'm really strong, or I'm really good at certain things, and I'll let you see those kind of things. It's the kind of things that we think that if you saw them, you would love us and you would be attracted to us, and that's what I let you see. But there's a problem with that, because, see, you and I were made for connection. We were made to be known and loved. We were made to be known and loved at a deep way, and the problem is that when I only let you know this much of me, which isn't even the true me, I know that you don't really know me. And I don't trust that you really love me. When all you see is this false self that's outside of me, that's not really me, I become this person, a self who is covered with shame, covered up by a false self of what I let you see. And the problem with that is I was meant to be connected, but I can't be connected unless I'm known. And even when I let you know this false self of me, something inside of me says, yeah, but if you really knew me, you wouldn't love me. The counselor said to Donald Miller, your inner self, this is who you really are. And this is where you give and receive love. The rest of this, it's just theater. And when we hide behind this false self, we live covered in shame. And it keeps us from deep connection with other people and with God. So how do we deal with shame? What do we do? Well, just a few years ago, I heard Dr. Brene Brown talk at a conference in Peachtree City that I was at with a group of us on staff. And as soon as the conference was over, I went out and got her book. I thought it was just me. That's the title of the book. And I read it. And in reading the book, I realized that she was sharing insights in this book with our generation that a long time ago Jesus had actually shared to help people in our world. So today what I want to do is I want to share with you an encounter that Jesus has with a woman who is covered in shame. We're told her story by one of the writers in the Bible who writes about the life of Jesus. His name is Mark, and the book of the Bible that he writes has his name. This woman who meets Jesus is a deeply broken woman. Her body's broken. In fact, Mark writes, there was a woman who was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. Now, We're not really told what her condition was, but most people who read it believe that she had a chronic menstrual disorder. Now, that would be a problem for any woman at any place at any time. But for a woman, a Jewish woman, in her culture, in her day, this was a huge problem. See, in her world, this particular problem would have made her what they called ceremonially unclean. And what that meant was that she was untouchable. She couldn't be around other people because if anyone touched her for any reason, they would take on her nature of being unclean. It meant that if she was married, she couldn't be touched by her husband for 12 years. It also meant that once this condition came, of course, she couldn't have children, which in their day also led to her sort of being ostracized. I mean, that's a problem for anybody at any time, but in their day, to not be a woman and not be able to have children, it made you even more of an outcast. If she had had children prior to this 12-year ordeal that she went through, imagine, she could not touch her children for 12 years, and she could not be touched by her children for 12 years. Not only that, but she wouldn't be allowed to go to the temple or to go to a synagogue and to worship God. One person who described her in a commentary said that she was walking pollution. And that's how people saw her. And that's how she saw herself. Because, see, it wasn't just her body that was broken. Her soul was broken too. I mean, it only makes sense when you hear how I described that condition, that she's drowning in shame. She's covered in shame. And we see signs of that in her thinking and in her action. Brene Brown writes, "Shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we're flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging." This lady, with her physical conditions and all the cultural surroundings of it and the social and even spiritual consequences it led to, how could she not feel exactly like that? Brown adds, "Shame is about the fear of disconnection. When we're experiencing shame, we're steeped in the fear of being ridiculed, diminished, or seen as flawed. We're afraid that we've exposed or revealed a part of us that jeopardizes our connection and our worthiness of acceptance." Now, that wasn't just this woman's fear. That was her reality. She lived in that every day. God made her, like He made all of us, to experience deep connection. We're made in His image, and we were made for community. We were made to be loved and to love. We were made to know and to be known. But her condition ripped her apart from all of her relational connectedness. And we're made for connected. And when you're isolated, this feeling of hopelessness and desperation comes over you. And this woman is desperate. Now, not just to heal her soul, but to heal her body. Mark says, "She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse." Her desperation had led her to try absolutely everything, and everything she tried had left her further from a solution, to the point that she was hopeless. She had been hopeless for a long, long time. And then she began to hear rumors about a man. She heard about a man. They said his name was Jesus, and she heard that people who went to Jesus, that if He were to touch them, that they'd be healed, and hope returned to her. But there are all kinds of problems with this thought of Jesus and bringing hope. I mean, what if He never even came to her town? What if He never came near to where she was? What if she couldn't get to Him? And beside that, even if He did come to her town, how would she get close enough to Him? I mean, other people around from her town would know that she's unclean, that she's not supposed to be near other people in the crowd. Maybe He would just look at her and He would know that she was unclean. And He'd look at her and turn away. What would He think? So she came up with a plan. Her plan was that when Jesus came near, she would disguise herself, and she would sneak up on Him from behind so that nobody else would know, and she would come up from behind Him, and she didn't want to afflict Him with being unclean, because if she touched Him, she would be unclean, or if He touched her. So she thought to herself, I'll just touch His garment. maybe he has enough power that if I could just touch his garment, maybe power would flow through his garment and I could be healed. And so she waited. And then the rumors began. She began to hear, Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming. He's coming across the lake. And so she began to put her plan into action. As she begins to head into her town, it finally hits her. There's a part of it she hadn't thought about. There was a problem that she hadn't thought about, but now it's very apparent. There's a crowd around Jesus, and it's such a crowd. I mean, it's a crowd of people that there's so much all around him that there's no way she can sneak up on all of them from behind. Somebody's going to know who she is. As good as she can disguise it, everybody's going to know, but she has to go. Jesus is her only hope. He's her last hope. She's desperate to go. I wonder how long she stood far off. I wonder how long she stood back and she tried to catch a glimpse of his face to see if he looked like he was kind, to see if there was something different. I wonder how long she looked to see if there was a way to get close. I wonder how long it took her to muster up her courage. But finally, she just went for it. Now, we don't know how long it took, but we know what she was thinking. Mark tells us she was thinking, if I just touch his clothes, if I could just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. What's interesting is the verb tense that Mark chooses to use in the original language means that she was continually thinking this with every step, with every breath, with every movement. She's thinking, if I could just touch him, if I could just touch him, if I could just get close, maybe then I'd be healed. And then she reached out and she touched his cloak. And Mark says, immediately her bleeding stopped. She felt in her body that she'd been freed from her suffering. But there was still a problem. There was still a problem. See, she had focused exclusively on her body, and what almost certainly she didn't understand is there was something much deeper in her that was broken. Because shame's like that. You know, when you struggle with shame, you don't know you struggle with shame. You feel like you're exposed and you're a problem and you're a weight on everybody, and everybody feels like you're a burden to be around, but you don't know that it's shame that's causing you to feel that way. What you feel is, I'm a burden and I'm a problem and nobody wants to be around me, and I don't want anybody to see that. You don't know that you're seeing your whole world through shame-colored glasses. That has to be where this woman was. I mean, this woman for 12 years had felt totally unclean because she had been unclean, and here she is. She knows. Mark tells us she knew in the moment her body had been healed. She's no longer unclean. She thought that had been her primary problem. That's why she's the only person in the Bible who had ever snuck up on Jesus to have a covert kind of healing. And when she sneaks up on him, she gets healed and she knows it. But rather than say thank you or anything to Jesus, she decides she's just going to slink away. Now think about that. She's been physically healed, and she knows she's been physically healed. She's no longer unclean. Everybody can know that everything's okay. Why would she try to get away without being noticed? Well, it's because she doesn't feel clean. She actually had just been healed in her body, but she didn't realize she still felt covered in shame. She got to Jesus, she touched him, and was physically healed, and she starts to sneak away. And then Jesus spoke, "Who touched me?" Now, his disciples, who were often sort of clueless about everything going on, they say, "Jesus touched you? I mean, really touched you? I mean, dude, look around. We're in a crowd. If you're so conscious of people touching him, maybe you should have said something before we got in this crowd. Everybody's touching you, Jesus." And Jesus says, "No, not that. Somebody touched me." And Mark says that he continually looked around to see who it was. Now, why? Why is Jesus looking around to see who it is? I mean, one thing, Jesus knew who it was, right? I mean, that's the reason he's looking around, because he knew who it was, and he knew that there was still a problem that she had. And I mean, why single her out in front of the crowd? I mean, she already has been embarrassed for 12 years. This is just going to embarrass and expose her more. It's because he knows. He knows there's a deeper problem, that He knows that she needs to come forth, that she needs to speak in front of this crowd. Brene Brown writes, "There's nothing more frustrating and sometimes frightening than feeling pain and not being able to describe it or to explain it to someone. It doesn't matter if it's physical pain or emotional pain. When we can't find the right words to explain our painful experiences to others, we often feel alone and scared." Jesus knew. If I just let her sneak off, thinking she's better, she's going to quickly discover that she doesn't feel much different, that she still feels like she's wrong. Touching Jesus' garment had healed her body, but it would take empathy to heal her shame. And so Jesus, he spoke out to the crowd, and he gets the crowd stirred up, and everybody's looking around, and I can just imagine how much self-conscious she feels, but in a moment she knows that she has to say something. And then Mark says, "Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth." Shame researchers tell us that a part of being free from shame is we have to get to a place where we give words to our shame and we share our shame with other people. And that's exactly what Jesus gets this woman to do. And in that moment where she starts sharing with him, and before this huge crowd, she starts sharing her story, the whole truth, in that moment, it becomes the crossroads moment of her life. She confessed all the ugliness that she felt. She confessed all the separation she felt. She confessed everything to a man who said he was God in the flesh and in front of this whole crowd. And you know, the whole time that she's sharing it, she's sort of forced to. He's called her out. The whole time she's thinking, what's he going to say? How's Jesus going to respond? He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering." This is the only time that is recorded that Jesus called anybody daughter. Can you imagine? Can you imagine how it felt to this woman to not only be freed physically, but to have God in the flesh look at her and use this very tender word, daughter? How long had it been since she had heard a man speak to her with such kindness? How long had it been since anybody had looked at her and spoke at her with this kind of affection? God came down to earth. He called her daughter, and he let her know that despite how she felt about herself as being unclean, that she was his child. That while she still felt who she was, and she saw herself through shame-colored glasses, who she was the beloved child of the Most High God. Without those shame-colored glasses, she was loved deeply by the God of this universe. Moments earlier, Jesus had touched and healed her body, and now his empathy was healing her soul. See, empathy makes empathy makes it really difficult for shame to survive in a person's life. See, shame isolates us, and the problem with being isolated and living in shame is that you can't be healed of shame in isolation. This woman had enough courage to finally say to herself, I've got to get to Jesus. I've got to get to Jesus, and to reach out and touch him. And it healed her body. What she didn't understand is that it wasn't enough just to heal her body. She had to be healed of the shame. And so Jesus pulled the story out of her, and his response healed her and gave her a new self-identity. She wasn't just an unclean woman. She was a child, a daughter of God. She met the God who is for the shame-filled. And what I've been finding in my story is the same thing that this woman found in her story. Like her, I came to a place where I felt untouchable. Like her, I felt like there was not just something I had done wrong, that there must be something wrong with me, and that if anybody got close to me, if I got too close to anyone, that I would contaminate and damage them. Everybody I came in contact with would see it. And like her, I had this feeling that I had to be isolated and unable to connect with other people. And like her, one day, I came in contact with Jesus. I could see him from a distance. I heard about what he could do. And like her, Jesus forced me to have an encounter with him. And like her, he left me with a choice that I had to decide, what would I do? And like her, Jesus has changed everything for me. He showed me. I'm the beloved Son of the Most High God. And what I may have missed from my earthly father was more than provided by my heavenly Father. Now, to be honest with you, I'm not completely done with this journey yet. There are times that I still struggle with that. I mean, I sometimes really have a difficult time with people I don't know very well who say very nice things to me. I right off doubt it. I right off hold it at a distance. I'm still on a journey. But more and more these days, I feel the approval of the God who loves me. And as I live in his approval and I take off the shame-colored glasses, I'm more and more able to accept affection from other people. My guess is the process for this woman was similar. I wonder how many times she wound up walking into the market and she would think, is the reason that woman didn't say hello to me because I'm not worthy of being said hello to? I wonder how often she cringed every time somebody would touch her. I wonder how many times she still saw herself through those shame-colored glasses. And I wonder how many times she came back to that encounter with Jesus and she heard him say, daughter, go and be healed. See, from that moment on, everything changes. But we don't know how immediate the full change was. But we know Jesus brought her healing. But what if he hadn't? What if Jesus hadn't called her out in the crowd? What if he hadn't said, who touched me? What if he hadn't made the crowd look around? What if he hadn't sort of pulled the story out of her? What if she had never spoken up? What if she had never said it? She would have stopped the bleeding. Her body would have been healed. But she would have probably continued feeling unclean for a long, long time and living in isolation and sneaking and slinking around in crowds. But because of Jesus, her life was forever changed. The truth is, we don't really know what happened in the next part of her story. But the story I'm most interested in, it's your story. Is it possible that somebody or something has made you feel unlovable and covered in shame? Is it possible that you've been looking at your whole life through shame-colored glasses? Or maybe you never even realized it? Have you let the feeling that you have that you are a mistake, that you were a mistake, that you are wrong, and struggle to keep you from connecting with other people deeply? Have you developed a false self that you present to other people, and when they tell you they love you because you've only presented the false self and you know they don't really know you, you never really feel anyone's love? Please understand that there is a God who is for the shame-filled, and he calls you son, daughter. And if you will turn to him, he will heal you, and he will lift you up. He will call you a part of his family. He thinks you're worthwhile. He thought you were worth enough to give his life for, to die for. There's this theme in the Bible where God continually says to people, I'm your refuge. Take refuge in me. And it's like he's saying to us, this world could be a really hard place, and you don't know if you're going to be loved for who you are, if people are going to really accept you how you are. Okay. But instead of trying to protect yourself, instead of trying to cover up the shame that you feel with some false self and never really ever connecting with God or with anybody else, why not take refuge in God? And it looks sort of like this. God says to us, I will be your refuge. And yourself, who you really are, just live in my protection. And when you're around people and you feel like that you're unworthy and unloved, just remember that the God of the universe says you can take your refuge and trust in me. I will be your refuge, and I will keep you safe. And you can connect deeper with me, and that will allow you to connect with other people. And as you do, you will be healed from your shame, not only by connecting with God, but by connecting with other people. And I hope that Community Christian can be a place where that can happen for you. It will, if you will take a chance on it. Let me pray for us. Father in heaven, I am so thankful for your deep love for all of us. I'm thankful for your love for me. That you look at me and you don't see things that I see. You see me as your beloved Son, worthy of Jesus giving his life for. Thank you for Jesus and his example. And God, I pray for other people that struggle carrying around a false self, covering up their shame, that you would allow us to take refuge in you. Thank you for your deep love for us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.